I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Calm down, Elizabeth, I told myself. Looking at my 35-year-old reflection in the mirror, I was preparing for this momentous occasion. The day had finally come to tell James about my pregnancy. Honey, do you have a minute? I called out as I headed toward the living room. James was sitting on the sofa reading the newspaper as usual. His thick brown hair was slightly disheveled, and his blue eyes scanned the print behind his glasses. At 38, he had steadily built his career as a lawyer. What is it, Liz? He looked up and smiled gently. We met 3 years ago when the advertising agency where I work was assigned to handle a new campaign for his law firm. That's when we first met face to face. We hit it off during our business meetings, and after connecting so quickly, we decided to get married after just 1 year. James, I have something to tell you. My voice trembled slightly with nervousness. Our family is about to grow. After a moment of silence, surprise and joy spread across James's face. You mean? Liz, are you? I nodded slowly. Yes, we're going to be parents. James tossed aside the newspaper, stood up, and embraced me. My goodness. This is wonderful news. His voice quivered with excitement. In his embrace, I felt a complex mixture of happiness and anxiety. The joy of carrying a new life and the anticipation of beginning a new chapter in our lives. But at the same time, anxiety crept in, casting a shadow over this happy moment. James, I said, hesitating slightly. How should we tell your mother? James's expression clouded momentarily. His relationship with his mother, Martha, had always been complicated. Martha, with her strict and traditional values, had initially disapproved of our marriage. Though she seemed to accept it on the surface now, I always felt a lingering doubt in her eyes. Don't worry, Liz, James said as he rubbed my back. Mother will be thrilled. She's going to have a grandchild, after all. Encouraged by his words, I still felt anxiety swirling in the depths of my heart. How would this joyful event change our family? And what would happen to my relationship with Martha? Outside the window, the spring sunlight shone brightly, as if blessing the birth of a new life. But to me, it felt like long shadows were creeping in even amid that light. I had an intuition that the story about to unfold would significantly change all of our lives. While feeling secure in James's arms, my mind was full of thoughts about Martha. I recalled our first meeting. Hello, Martha, I said in greeting, and Martha's sharp gaze looked me up and down appraisingly. Elizabeth, she said coldly. So you're James's partner. From that moment, my relationship with Martha had been as cold as ice. At 65, Martha was a woman who valued her family's pride and traditions above all else. Her graying hair was always perfectly styled, and her posture was consistently erect. Her stern gaze was enough to make those around her shrink back. James, I said, my face still buried in my husband's chest. Does your mother truly accept me? James sighed deeply. Mother is a complex person. I think she's trying to accept you as family in her own way. However, that acceptance always felt conditional. At family gatherings, Martha continued to ask critical questions about my work and hobbies. The advertising industry, she frowned one day at dinner. Can you really support James with such a frivolous career? James tried to defend me, but Martha's words had already cut deep into my heart. Her strictness had influenced James as well. Sometimes, when I saw him unconsciously mimicking his mother's behavior, I felt a tightness in my chest. Mother wishes for our happiness, James often said. But there was always tension lingering behind those words. Martha's presence seemed to create an invisible wall between us as a couple. James was caught between his mother and his wife, and sometimes he would wear a pained expression. Let's tell your mother about the pregnancy together, I said with determination. James's face showed relief. Thank you, Liz. Having you by my side gives me strength. Encouraged by his words, anxiety still swirled in my heart. How would Martha receive this new family member? And what would happen to our family's future? Outside the window, the wind rustled the trees. I felt both hope and anxiety simultaneously. How would my relationship with Martha change with the birth of this new life? That was still an unknown world to everyone. The day to tell Martha about the pregnancy finally arrived. James and I, hand in hand, stood at the entrance of Martha's large mansion. "Are you ready?" James gently squeezed my hand. Taking a deep breath, I nodded. "Yes, let's go." When we were shown into the living room, Martha was sitting in what looked like an expensive chair, watching us. "What's the matter? You both seem oddly tense." Martha's sharp eyes caught us. James cleared his throat.
Can you imagine making $10,000 a month just from YouTube, all from home? That's exactly what I did with Reddit Stories. No face, no voice. Check the link in the description if you're curious.
"Mother, we have important news. Elizabeth is pregnant," he declared proudly. A moment of silence dominated the room. Martha's expression seemed to freeze. "I see." She began slowly, choosing her words. "Congratulations." There was no warmth in those words, rather, they seemed uttered out of obligation. "Mother, this is truly happy news for us," I said, summoning my courage. Martha stared at me. "Yes, I'm sure it is. But, Elizabeth, what about your work?" That question made me falter momentarily. "Of course, I'll take time off after the birth, but I plan to return to work afterward." "Well," Martha frowned. "Balancing childcare and work isn't easy, you know." James cut in. "Mother, we intend to work together and manage." Martha looked at her son and softened her expression slightly. "I see, you have your own way of doing things." But we could sense the critical tone hidden behind those words. On the way home, silence filled the car. "James," I finally spoke. "Is your mother truly happy for us?" He answered without taking his eyes off the road. That was Mother's way of responding. "Time will sort things out." But there was no conviction in those words. That night, I couldn't sleep. While thinking about the baby warmed my heart, Martha's cold response wouldn't leave my mind. Suddenly, I placed my hand on my stomach. "It's all right, baby," I whispered. "I'll get through this for you." Outside the window, moonlight gently illuminated the room, as if blessing the birth of a new life. However, even in that light, the shadow of trials awaiting us seemed to appear and disappear. Around my 5th month of pregnancy, I was beginning to adjust to the busy pace of work. But it was also around this time that a change appeared in Martha's attitude. One day, an unexpected visitor came to my office. "Elizabeth, excuse my intrusion," I looked up in surprise at Martha's voice. "Martha? Why are you here?" "I had an errand nearby," she said, but her eyes were carefully examining the items on my desk. "You seem busy," Martha remarked. "Isn't this too much strain for a pregnant woman?" "I'm fine," I answered with a forced smile. "In fact, I'm quite fulfilled." At that moment, my colleague Mike entered the office with some documents. "Liz, could you check this proposal?" "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you had a visitor." Martha's eyes flashed sharply for a moment. "Excuse me," Mike hurriedly left. "My, how friendly," Martha's voice dripped with sarcasm. "He's just a colleague," I explained, but Martha's expression remained clouded. From that day on, Martha's visits began to increase. Lunch at restaurants, stopping by after shopping, her eyes seemed to be constantly tracking my movements. When I consulted James, he frowned. "That's probably just Mother's way of showing concern," he said, but there was no confidence in his voice. One evening, while working late, my phone rang. It was from James. "Liz, I got a call from Mother. She says you're not home yet." "Yes, I have a job deadline approaching." I understand. Be careful on your way home. After hanging up, I felt uneasy. Why was Martha concerned about what time I got home? The following weekend, while on a family picnic, I was responding to a message from a friend when Martha approached. Who are you messaging? Her voice clearly contained suspicion. Just a friend, I answered, but Martha's eyes didn't seem to believe me. That night, when James and I were alone, I decided to speak up. James, I think your mother suspects me of something. He looked surprised. What do you mean? I explained the recent events. James listened silently, but confusion showed on his face. Mother seems to have had some painful experience in the past, he began carefully, choosing his words. But I haven't been told the details. Those words filled me with both anxiety and curiosity. What had happened in Martha's past? Outside the window, the darkness of night was deepening. I had the feeling that some yet unseen truth was hidden in that darkness. And I instinctively felt that the day when that truth would be revealed was steadily approaching. By my 7th month of pregnancy, my belly had grown too large to hide. As Martha's surveillance intensified daily, James suggested dinner at an upscale restaurant to strengthen family bonds. We met in front of the city's most reputable restaurant. Mother, thank you for coming, James said with a smile. Martha nodded elegantly. Such a special occasion. Upon entering the restaurant, soft lighting and live music greeted us. The waiter guided us to a table by the window with a magnificent night view. Would you like some wine? The waiter asked. I'll have juice, I began to say, but Martha interrupted. Elizabeth, a little won't hurt. Pregnant women used to enjoy wine in the old days. No, thank you, I politely declined. Martha's eyes narrowed. I see, for your health then. The food was served amid the tense atmosphere. Well, James started a conversation. Have you thought about names for the baby? At that moment, Martha suddenly leaned forward. By the way, Elizabeth. You've been out late a lot for work recently, haven't you? I paused. Yes, it's been busy with deadlines. Is it really work? Martha's voice grew sharp. Or is there another reason? Mother, what are you saying? James said with a confused face. But Martha wouldn't stop. Tell me, Elizabeth. Is that child really James's? The restaurant's noise seemed to fade away for a moment. What did you say? I asked with a trembling voice. I have evidence, Martha said coldly. I've seen pictures of you being friendly with other men. That's my colleague. I desperately tried to explain. But Martha's eyes were blazing as she stared at me. Liar. Are you trying to trample on this family's honor? Mother, calm down, James tried to restrain her, but Martha had stood up. You shameless woman. Martha's voice echoed. Are you trying to disgrace our family name? All eyes in the restaurant were on us. Martha, please. This is a public place, I pleaded in a small voice. However, Martha's anger didn't subside, it grew even more intense. Her eyes held a fierce emotion I had never seen before. At that moment, I was struck by a terrible premonition. That this night would dramatically change the fate of our family. As Martha's shouting continued, I stood up and headed for the balcony, thinking I should try to calm down. I thought the fresh outdoor air might help me temporarily escape this tense situation. Elizabeth, we're not finished. Martha followed after me. The cold night breeze caressed my cheeks. The distant city lights felt like they belonged to a different world. Martha, please. Let's talk calmly, I said with a shaking voice. But the light of reason had disappeared from Martha's eyes. I won't let a woman like you bear our precious air. Each time she stepped closer, I backed away. I felt the balcony railing against my back and realized I had nowhere to run. Mother, stop. I heard James's voice. I could see him rushing to the balcony. That's when it happened. "Get out of this family!" Martha shouted and pushed me with both hands. Losing my balance, I went over the railing and was thrown into the air. In the moment of falling, time seemed to stand still. James's scream, the restaurant patron's cries, and my own heartbeat all seemed to be in slow motion. "Baby!" I instinctively protected my stomach with both hands. Just before hitting the ground, my consciousness was enveloped in darkness. When I came to, I was surrounded by bright light and the smell of disinfectant. Lying on a hospital bed, I slowly opened my eyes. "Liz! Thank goodness, you're awake," I heard James's voice. His eyes were red, and he looked exhausted. "The baby?" I asked weakly. James squeezed my hand. "It's all right. Both you and the baby are safe." Miraculously, there were no serious injuries. As I sighed with relief, James continued, "The police are here. They want to talk about Mother's actions." At those words, the events at the restaurant vividly came back to me. Martha's anger, the altercation on the balcony, and then, the fall. "Martha?" I asked fearfully. James's expression darkened. "She was taken by the police." Outside the window, the morning sun was beginning to rise. That light, heralding the beginning of a new day, seemed to symbolize the major turning point that had arrived in our lives. What would happen now? What about our relationship with Martha? Our family's future? And this baby? As many questions raced through my mind, I closed my eyes again. For now, I could only savor this miraculous survival. There was a knock at the hospital room door, and a middle-aged female doctor in a white coat entered. "How are you feeling?" she asked with a warm smile. James stood up to greet the doctor. Dr. Johnson, checking the medical chart, began explaining to me. Fortunately, serious trauma was avoided. However, the impact of the fall has caused a mild concussion and several bruises and sprains. Further tests are needed to check the condition of the fetus in detail. Dr. Johnson continued carefully, choosing her words. "At this point, the fetus's heartbeat is stable, but after an accident like this, we need to carefully monitor the progress." James squeezed my hand. I could feel the strength in his grip. "What kind of tests will be necessary?" he asked. "First, we'll conduct a detailed ultrasound. And I also recommend an amniocentesis to more accurately assess the fetus's health status." James and I looked at each other. Complex emotions, anxiety and expectation, were exchanged wordlessly. "Are there risks to the tests?" I asked in a small voice. "Amniocentesis carries a slight risk of miscarriage, but considering the current situation, I believe the benefits outweigh the risks," Dr. Johnson explained carefully. Silence dominated the room. We as a couple were acutely aware that we were being forced to make a serious decision. "Take time to think about it," Dr. Johnson said gently. "However, a decision as soon as possible is preferable." After she left the room, James and I didn't exchange words for a long time. Several days passed. James and I discussed repeatedly whether to undergo the tests. "Liz, I think we should do everything we can," James said with a serious expression. I took a deep breath and answered, "Yes. For the baby's sake, I want to do all necessary tests." Having made our decision, we informed Dr. Johnson of our choice to proceed with the tests. "I think that's a wise decision," she said with a relieved expression. "Let's begin preparations right away." On the day of the tests, a heavy atmosphere enveloped us as we gathered in the hospital testing room. Martha was also present. "We'll take blood samples in order," the nurse explained. James offered his arm first. As the needle pierced his arm, he slightly winced. Next was my turn. The anxiety about the truth that might be revealed was greater than the pain of the blood draw. Martha was last. She hesitated. Mother, please, James pleaded. It's for your grandchild. Martha remained silent for a long time but finally extended her arm. I could see her hand trembling. After the blood draw, Dr. Johnson appeared. It will take a few days for the results. Until then, please continue with your normal life. As we were leaving the hospital, Martha suddenly approached me. Elizabeth, her voice was trembling. If something unexpected is discovered, can you forgive me? I couldn't hide my confusion at those words. What do you mean? Martha left without answering. I could see a shadow on her back, as if she were carrying some grave secret. James and I were silent for a long time. James, I finally spoke. Don't you think your mother is hiding something? He sighed deeply. I don't know. But when the results come out, everything should become clear. Outside the window, the sun was setting. Its red light felt as if it were prophesying our fate. While waiting for the results, our hearts swung between anxiety and expectation. What would this test bring to our family? No one could predict. The only certainty was that this result might change our lives forever. 3 days had passed since the test. While waiting for the results, I was quietly lying in a room at the hospital. The doctors had advised me to stay hospitalized until the test results came back. I squinted at the soft sunlight streaming through the window. James had been visiting frequently between his work, but he was absent now. In the silence, I was reflecting on the past. My meeting with James, our marriage, and the complex relationship with Martha. Everything was running through my mind like a slideshow. Suddenly, Martha's last words came back to me. If something unexpected is discovered, can you forgive me? I still couldn't understand what those words meant. A nurse entered the room and began checking my vitals. How is the baby doing? I asked. The heartbeat is stable, she smiled kindly. It's a strong child. Though somewhat reassured by those words, my anxiety about the test results didn't disappear. As I watched the nurse leave the room, I once again immersed myself in reminiscence. My first meeting with Martha, her cold gaze, and her gradually changing attitude. It all seemed like foreshadowing for something. I sighed deeply. Picking up the small mirror beside the bed, I looked at my face. I could see anxiety and expectation mingled in my tired expression. Just then, there was a knock, and Dr. Johnson entered. She had a piece of paper in her hand. She seemed to be carefully choosing her words. The results are in. I felt my heart racing. How would the truth about to be revealed change our lives? At that moment, everything was about to be made clear. Before hearing the results, I said in a small voice, "Can I call my husband? And I'd like his mother to come too." Dr. Johnson nodded in understanding. Of course. Let me know when you're ready. As I watched her leave the room, I took a deep breath. I was desperately trying to prepare myself mentally for what was about to happen. Tension filled the hospital room. James sat on my right, while Martha sat on a chair a little distance away. Dr. Johnson, holding the paper with the results, looked at us with a serious expression. "Are you ready?" Dr. Johnson quietly asked. We nodded silently. "First, regarding the fetus's health," she began, "we've determined that the possibility of Klinefelter syndrome is low." A sigh of relief spread throughout the room. However, Dr. Johnson's expression remained stern. However, she continued, "In the process of testing, an unexpected fact came to light." At that moment, I saw Martha stiffen. "James," Dr. Johnson began speaking to my husband, carefully choosing her words, "when comparing your DNA with Martha's, we found a match indicating a mother-child relationship." "Of course. Mother is my mother," James said with a confused look. However, Dr. Johnson took a deep breath before continuing, "In the DNA comparison with the man registered as your father, we did not find a match indicating a parent-child relationship." The room was enveloped in a silence as if frozen. So, what does that mean? James's voice was trembling. Dr. Johnson quietly answered, genetically speaking, your father is not the person who is registered. Those words echoed throughout the room like a bomb. This isn't supposed to. Martha murmured in a shaking voice. I held James's hand tightly. His face was pale, and his eyes were staring into empty space. Mother, James slowly turned to Martha. What does this mean? Martha covered her face with both hands and began to tremble. I need your forgiveness. At that moment, we intuitively understood that a 30-year-old secret was about to be revealed. Dr. Johnson quietly stood up. You might need some time. I'll wait outside, so please call me if you need anything. After she left, a heavy silence dominated the room. The moment for the truth to be revealed had finally arrived. Martha took a deep breath and began speaking in a trembling voice. 30 years ago. I was still young, her eyes seemed to be looking at a distant past. Your father, no, the man who raised you, was a workaholic. James listened silently. Nothing could be read from his expression. I was lonely, Martha continued. That's when I met him. Him. I couldn't help but ask. Martha nodded. Robert. He was kind to me. He understood me. And. Martha's voice broke off. And I was born, James said in a cold voice. Martha nodded, wiping away tears. Yes. But I had no choice. I couldn't lose everything, family honor, social standing. So you lied, James's voice was tinged with anger. Robert was asked to keep quiet too. He had a family as well. Martha said painfully. A heavy silence fell over the room. For 30 years, you've been lying all this time, I finally spoke. Martha looked up and, for the first time, looked straight into my eyes. Yes. That's why I doubted you. I thought you might also. She choked on her words. That's why you couldn't trust me, I said in a small voice. James stood up and walked to the window. So my life was all a lie. No. Martha cried out. The love for you is real. The love from the father who raised you. But you continued to hide the truth, James said without turning around. Martha's shoulders dropped. Yes, that is my sin. I quietly got up from the bed and stood beside James. Darling. James looked at me and gently took my hand. Liz, we will never lie to our child. I nodded. Of course. Martha said in a small voice, will I be forgiven? James and I looked at each other. No one yet knew what impact this result would have on us. The only certainty was that this truth would greatly change our future. 6 months had passed since the truth was revealed. In the living room where autumn's sunlight streamed in, I was holding my newborn son. Jacob, I kissed his tiny cheek. You are our hope. James came in with coffee. Mother called. I looked up. What did she say? She asked if we'd like to have dinner together this Sunday, he said, looking a bit tense. Since the truth was revealed, our relationship with Martha had been complicated. Anger, sadness, and gradually emerging understanding. Amid these mixed emotions, we were trying to move forward little by little. Let's go, I said with determination. Jacob has the right to meet his grandmother. On Sunday, we took a deep breath in front of Martha's house. The door opened, and Martha appeared. Her eyes immediately moistened when she saw Jacob. Oh, what a beautiful child. She reached out with trembling hands. James hesitated for a moment but soon handed his son to Martha. I'm sorry, Martha cried as she held the baby. And thank you. We quietly entered the house. Homemade dishes were laid out on the table. A taste of memories, James murmured. As we ate, we gradually exchanged conversation. Talk of the past, present life, and hopes for the future. James, Martha said with a serious expression. If you want to meet your real father, I can give you his contact information. Tension ran through the room. James was silent for a long time, but eventually spoke. Not yet. But someday, when that time comes, I'd like you to tell me. Martha's face showed relief. After the meal, as we were preparing to leave, Martha called out to us. Will you come again? Her voice mixed hope and anxiety. James and I looked at each other, and then nodded simultaneously. Of course, Mother, I said gently. Tears welled up in Martha's eyes again. In the car on the way home, James quietly said, It's not perfect, but this is our family. I nodded. Yes. We can't change the past, but we can create the future ourselves. Looking at Jacob sleeping in the back seat, we felt that we were beginning a new chapter. Though truth can sometimes be painful, overcoming it can create stronger bonds. Our family was in the middle of that journey. And I felt from my heart that this story was not an end, but a new beginning.